The desert wind howled across the barren lands near the San Juan Mountains, carrying with it the promise of another scorching day. Luke Matthews wiped the sweat from his weathered brow and squinted at the horizon where heat waves danced like ghostly serpents. His small ranch, if one could call it that, consisted of little more than a ramshackle cabin, a corral held together by hope and baling wire, and 30 head of scrawny cattle that looked as beaten down by life as he felt. It had been 3 years since the fever took Martha and little Sarah. 3 years of waking to silence instead of his daughter's laughter, of cooking beans over a lonely fire instead of sharing meals with his wife. The other ranchers had urged him to sell and move to town, but this land held his memories, and memories were all he had left. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly as Luke checked the eastern pasture. His horse, a sturdy paint named Scout, picked its way carefully through the rocky terrain. They were heading toward Willow Creek, though calling it a creek was generous. Most days it was nothing more than a muddy trickle. That's when he saw it, a wall of brown advancing from the southwest. Sandstorm. Luke had lived in this country long enough to recognize the signs. He turned Scout toward home, but the storm moved faster than any he'd seen. Within minutes, the world disappeared into a choking cloud of dust and debris. Scout whinnied in fear as they pushed through the blinding sand. Luke pulled his bandana over his nose and mouth, eyes streaming tears as grit pelted his face. He couldn't see 5 feet ahead, relying on Scout's instinct to find the way home. Then Scout stopped abruptly, nearly throwing Luke from the saddle through the swirling dust. He made out dark shapes near the dry creek bed. His first thought was cattle. Maybe some had wandered from their range. But as he dismounted and moved closer, leading Scout by the reins, he realized these weren't cattle. 3 figures lay sprawled on the rocky ground. Women, Apache women, judging by their dress. Luke's hand instinctively moved to his rifle, but he stopped. These women weren't moving. As the wind momentarily died down, he saw the blood. The tallest of the 3 had a gash across her shoulder, her buckskin dress torn and stained dark. Another clutched her side where an arrow shaft protruded. The third seemed unconscious, her face pale beneath the dust. All 3 were unusually tall for women, nearly matching Luke's own height. Luke stood frozen. Helping Apaches could bring trouble from both sides. White settlers who'd shoot him for a traitor, and Apaches who might see him as an enemy trying to capture their women. But as he watched the wounded one's labored breathing, he thought of Martha. She would have helped anyone in need, regardless of the consequences. "Damn it all," he muttered, dropping Scout's reins. Moving quickly despite the storm, Luke checked each woman for signs of life. All 3 still breathed, though barely. The one with the arrow wound moaned when he touched her, her eyes fluttering open briefly. She stared at him with dark eyes full of pain and fear, then whispered something in Apache before losing consciousness again. Luke knew he couldn't treat them here. The storm was worsening, and coyotes would smell the blood come nightfall. His cabin was a mile away, impossibly far for 3 wounded women. But there was an old line shack closer, just beyond the ridge. It wasn't much, but it had walls and a roof. He lifted the smallest of the 3 first, surprised by her weight. These women were strong, built like warriors rather than the delicate creatures townfolk imagined. Scout stood steady as Luke draped her across the saddle. The horse's training held despite the wind and strange scent. The journey to the line shack became a blur of trips through the storm. 3 times he returned for the women, each journey a battle against the wind and his own exhaustion. By the time he carried the last one inside, his strength was nearly spent. The shack was crude. 1 room with a dirt floor, a few rough boards for furniture, and a stone fire pit. But it would serve. Luke laid the women on the pile of old blankets in the corner, then ventured back into the storm for his medical supplies from Scout's saddlebags. As he worked to clean and bandage their wounds, the tallest woman stirred. Her hands shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. Luke froze, meeting her gaze. She studied him intently. Then her lips moved. through cracked lips. She spoke in broken English. Poor rancher, rescued 3 giant Apache brides. The words sent a chill down Luke's spine. Brides? That meant they were important to someone, promised to warriors, perhaps, or part of an alliance between bands. Their deaths would demand vengeance. Easy now, Luke said softly, gently removing her grip. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you here. She held his gaze a moment longer, then closed her eyes. Whether from trust or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. The storm raged on as Luke tended to their wounds. The arrow had to come out, a dangerous procedure even in town with a proper doctor. Here, with his shaking hands and limited supplies, it was near suicide, but leaving it meant certain death from infection. He heated his knife in the fire and poured what little whiskey he had over the wound. The woman barely flinched as he worked, her companions unconscious throughout. When it was done, he sat back on his heels, sweat mixing with the dust on his face. Night fell with the storm still howling. Luke built up the fire and settled against the wall, rifle across his knees. The smart thing would be to leave come morning, pretend he'd never found them. But he couldn't shake the image of Martha's face, the way she'd looked at him when she was dying, making him promise to stay good. The women slept fitfully, occasionally crying out in their delirium. Luke found himself studying them in the firelight. Their faces, beneath the dirt and blood, were striking. High cheekbones, strong features that spoke of pride and endurance. Their hands bore calluses from work. Their arms showed the kind of muscle that came from drawing bows and riding horses since childhood. Toward dawn, the wind finally began to die. Luke dozed despite himself, jerked awake by every small sound. When pale light filtered through the cracks in the walls, he knew he faced a choice. He could leave them here with water and what little food he had, hope their people found them before the coyotes did. Or he could stay and face whatever consequences came. Outside, Scout nickered softly. Luke stood stiffly, muscles protesting the night spent on hard ground. He stepped out into the eerily quiet morning. The landscape had been transformed by the storm, familiar landmarks buried under new dunes, the sparse vegetation stripped bare. In the distance, he spotted movement. His heart hammered as he raised the rifle, then lowered it. Vultures, circling something to the south. Whatever had happened to these women, others hadn't been so fortunate. Luke gathered Scout's reins and led him to the small spring behind the shack. As the horse drank, Luke tried to piece together what he'd stumbled into. Apache brides traveling somewhere, attacked by enemies. But who would dare attack an Apache wedding party? And why were only these 3 women left? The questions would have to wait. Right now, he had 3 lives depending on him, and the day would bring new challenges. If their attackers came looking to finish the job, the shack would be a death trap. If the Apache came searching for their women and found them with a white man, Luke shook his head and led Scout back to the shack. Whatever came, he'd made his choice the moment he'd picked up that first woman. Martha would have been proud, he thought, even if she'd have called him a damn fool while she said it. Inside, one of the women had awakened, not the tall one who'd spoken, but another with fierce eyes despite her obvious pain. She watched him warily as he entered, her hand moving slightly as if reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. "Water," Luke said simply, showing her the canteen. "You need to drink." She hesitated, then nodded slightly, as he helped her drink, supporting her head with careful hands. Luke wondered what he'd set in motion. In this hard country, no good deed went unpunished, but sometimes, he reckoned, a man had to do what was right and let the consequences come as they would. The sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day. And somewhere out there, Luke knew, riders would be coming, Apache searching for their lost ones, or enemies seeking to finish their bloody work. Either way, his life as a poor rancher scratching out a living in the desert had just become a lot more complicated. The night stretched endlessly before Luke as he sat vigil in the cramped line shack. Outside, the sandstorm had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind an eerie stillness broken only by the distant howl of wolves. The fire crackled low, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the 3 Apache women who lay unconscious on the makeshift bedding. Luke's eyes burned from lack of sleep and the grit that still clung to everything. His mind raced with worries, infection setting into their wounds, Apache warriors tracking them here, white settlers discovering he harbored their enemies. Each concern seemed to multiply in the darkness, feeding on his exhaustion. The tallest woman, the one who had spoken earlier, stirred and moaned. Luke moved to her side, checking the bandage on her shoulder. The bleeding had stopped, but the wound was deep. Without proper medicine, fever would likely set in by morning. He dampened a cloth with precious water from his canteen and gently cleaned her face. Her eyes opened suddenly, dark and alert despite her condition. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the gulf of their different worlds. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "White man, why?" Luke understood her meaning. Why help them? Why risk everything for Apache women? He thought of how to answer in words she might understand. "Alone," he said simply, gesturing to himself. Then, surprising himself, he added, "Lost family? No pain." Something shifted in her expression, perhaps recognition of a shared sorrow. She nodded slightly before closing her eyes again. The wind outside picked up, not with the fury of the sandstorm, but with the cold bite that came with desert nights. Luke added more wood to the fire, knowing he was burning through his meager supply, but unwilling to let the women suffer from cold on top of their injuries. The second woman woke with a start, sitting up too quickly and crying out as pain lanced through her side. Luke raised his hands peacefully as she looked around wildly, clearly disoriented. "Safe," he said, hoping his tone would convey what his limited Apache vocabulary could not. "No harm." She focused on him, then looked to her companions. Seeing them alive seemed to calm her. She spoke rapidly in Apache to the tall woman, who responded weakly. Luke caught a few words he recognized. Pain, enemy, blood, but the rest was lost to him. The third woman remained unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Luke had found no visible wounds on her, leading him to suspect a blow to the head. Such injuries were unpredictable. She might wake in an hour or never wake at all. As the night wore on, Luke found himself studying his unexpected guests more closely. Their clothing, though torn and bloodied, showed fine craftwork, intricate beadwork and careful stitching that spoke of pride and skill. These were not common women, but ones of some standing in their band. The second woman, now fully awake, watched him with intelligent eyes. She was perhaps in her mid-20s, with a scar across her chin that suggested this was not her first battle. When Luke offered her water, she drank carefully, mindful not to take too much despite her obvious thirst. Through gestures and broken phrases, she managed to convey pieces of their story. They had been traveling, she made a walking motion with her fingers, when enemies attacked. She mimicked drawing a bow, then clutched her side where the arrow had struck. Her face hardened as she spoke of the attack, and Luke sensed there was more to this than a chance encounter with hostiles. The tall woman added her own fragments to the tale. "Marriage journey," she said in English, surprising Luke with her vocabulary. "3 brides. Important peace." Luke's heart sank. If these women were part of a peace negotiation between bands or tribes, their deaths could spark warfare across the territory. No wonder they had been targeted. Someone wanted that peace to fail. "Who attacked?" Luke asked, knowing the answer might determine all their fates. The women exchanged glances. The second one spoke a word Luke didn't recognize, but the venom in her tone needed no translation. The tall woman clarified. "Apache enemies want war, not peace." So it was internal conflict, not an attack by whites or Mexicans. That might work in their favor, or make things worse if the wrong band found them first. The howl of wolves grew closer, and Scout whinnied nervously outside. Luke stepped out to check on the horse, rifle in hand. The moon had risen, casting silver light across the transformed landscape. The sandstorm had erased all tracks, which was both blessing and curse. Their enemies couldn't follow, but neither could any rescue party. He led Scout inside the shack, not willing to risk losing the horse to wolves or thieves. The animal's presence seemed to comfort the women, who clearly understood horses. The second woman spoke softly to Scout and Apache, and the horse's ears pricked forward as if listening. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally overtook Luke's vigilance. He dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. In one of these moments of half-sleep, he felt a hand on his arm. The tall woman had dragged herself closer, her face tight with pain but her eyes clear. "Name?" she asked. "Luke," he answered. "Luke Matthews." She nodded, then placed a hand on her chest. "Ayana." She gestured to the second woman. "Nayeli," then to the unconscious third. "Siala." Luke repeated the names carefully, earning a slight smile from Ayana. It was strange how sharing names could create connection across such vast differences. These were no longer just Apache women, but individuals with their own stories and sorrows. As the first pale light of dawn seeped through the cracks in the walls, Luke knew decisions had to be made. The women needed proper medical attention, but the nearest town would likely shoot them on sight. His own ranch was better supplied but farther away, and moving them in daylight would be dangerous. Nayeli seemed to read his thoughts. She spoke urgently to Ayana, who translated haltingly. "Our people. Will come. Must signal." Luke understood. They wanted to alert their band to their location, but that meant revealing himself to the Apache, placing his life entirely in their hands. "How?" he asked. Nayeli mimed building a fire and creating smoke. Of course, smoke signals. But such signals could also attract their enemies. "Dangerous," Luke said. "Bad Apache might see." Ayana's jaw tightened. "More dangerous. To wait. Siala." She gestured to the unconscious woman. "She needs medicine, man." Luke looked at the three women, wounded and vulnerable, yet still radiating a fierce dignity. He thought of Martha again, how she had faced her own death with courage. These women deserved the same chance to fight for their lives. "All right," he said finally. "We make signal. But first, we prepare." He set about fortifying their position as best he could. The shack had only one entrance, which was both advantage and trap. He positioned himself where he could cover the door, checked his ammunition, only 20 rounds, and said a prayer to whatever power might be listening. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the desert, Luke built a small fire outside and added green brush to create smoke. Nayeli directed him in creating the pattern: 3 puffs, pause, 2 puffs, pause, repeat. A specific message that would mean something to her people. Then there was nothing to do but wait and watch the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful and terrible in its vastness. Somewhere out there, riders were moving, friend or foe, salvation or death. The women waited with the patience of their people, but Luke could see the strain. Ayana's wound had begun to seep again, and Siala still had not awakened. Time was running out. It was Nayeli who spotted them first, her sharp eyes catching movement where Luke saw only heat shimmer. She spoke rapidly to Ayana, who translated with visible effort. "Riders come. Many. Not sure. Which band?" Luke's mouth went dry. He checked his rifle again, knowing it would be useless against many warriors, but needing the familiar weight in his hands. The riders grew closer, their forms solidifying out of the desert haze. Then Nayeli made a sound. Relief or fear? Luke couldn't tell. She recognized something in their approach, their formation, or perhaps the way they rode. She turned to Luke with an expression he couldn't read. "My people," she said in accented English, surprising him, but also complicated. Luke was about to ask what she meant when the riders crested the ridge. 20 Apache warriors, armed and painted for war, their faces hard as the desert stone. At their head rode an imposing figure, a chief, judging by his bearing and the deference shown by the others. The chief's eyes found Luke immediately, then moved to the women visible through the shack's doorway. His expression revealed nothing, but Luke sensed the calculations happening behind those dark eyes. A white man with 3 wounded Apache brides. There would be questions, suspicions, and possibly violence. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Luke's future, perhaps his life, hung in the balance. And somewhere in the shack behind him, Ciala's breathing grew ever shallower, a reminder that whatever happened next, it needed to happen quickly. The dawn after the storm painted the desert in shades of purple and gray, the mountains standing like ancient sentinels against the brightening sky. Luke emerged from the shack, his body stiff from the night's vigil, and surveyed the transformed landscape. The sandstorm had carved new patterns in the earth, covering familiar landmarks and exposing others long buried. The 3 Apache women stirred as morning light filtered through the gaps in the walls. Ayanna, the tallest, attempted to sit up but winced as her shoulder wound protested. Nayeli, despite the arrow wound in her side, seemed to be regaining strength, her eyes alert and watchful. But it was Ciala who worried Luke most. She remained unconscious, her breathing shallow and irregular. Luke knew they couldn't stay in the line shack much longer. Their water was running low, and the women needed proper care. He stepped outside to scan the horizon, looking for any sign of riders, friendly or otherwise. The desert remained empty, save for a pair of buzzards circling lazily in the distance. He had just decided to risk moving them to his ranch when Nayeli called out softly. She had managed to stand and was examining Ciala with gentle but experienced hands. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her tone concerned. "What is it?" Luke asked Ayanna. "Her spirit walks far from body." Ayanna translated with difficulty. "Need medicine man soon, or she not return." Luke's frontier medical knowledge was limited to treating cuts, broken bones, and bullet wounds. Whatever ailed Ciala was beyond his ability to heal. He made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a day ago. "My ranch," he said, gesturing northeast. "Better shelter, more water. Then we find help." The women exchanged glances, understanding the risk he was taking. A white man bringing Apache women to his home could spark violence from both communities. But Ayanna nodded slowly. "We trust," she said simply. Getting the women to his ranch proved to be an arduous journey. Luke fashioned a travois from branches and blankets to carry Ciala, while Ayanna and Nayeli insisted on walking despite their injuries. Their strength impressed him. These were no delicate flowers, but women forged by harsh land and harder lives. The sun climbed mercilessly as they made their slow progress across the desert. Luke led Scout, who pulled the travois with patient strength. Every few hundred yards, they stopped to rest and share precious sips of water. During one of these breaks, Nayeli surprised him by pointing to various plants and indicating which were good for medicine, which for eating. Even wounded and far from home, she was teaching him survival. It was midday when they finally saw Luke's ranch in the distance, a small collection of buildings that looked even more modest than usual against the vast landscape. But to Luke, it meant safety, supplies, and shelter from the brutal sun. As they approached, Luke noticed fresh horse tracks around his property. His hand moved to his rifle, but Ayanna placed a restraining hand on his arm. "No danger," she said, studying the tracks. "Scouts, they watch, not attack." Luke understood. Word of his actions had already spread. Apache scouts were monitoring him, deciding whether he was friend or foe. The weight of unseen eyes followed them as they entered the ranch. Luke's cabin was simple but clean. One main room with a fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen. He helped the women inside, settling them on his bed and the old sofa Martha had insisted on keeping despite its impracticality on the frontier. For the first time, the women saw evidence of his past life. Martha's sewing basket still in the corner, Sarah's small dress hanging on a peg, a family photograph on the mantel. Ayanna's eyes lingered on these items, understanding dawning in her expression. "Your family?" she asked softly. "Gone," Luke replied, the word carrying 3 years of grief. Fever took them. The simple explanation seemed to shift something between them. Nayeli spoke quietly to Ayanna, who nodded. "She says, you understand loss. "This why you help?" Luke busied himself heating water and gathering his medical supplies. Uncomfortable with their perception, he'd help them because it was right, not because of some shared sorrow. But perhaps the two were more connected than he wanted to admit. As he cleaned and redressed their wounds with proper supplies, the women began to share more of their story. Through a combination of Ayanna's broken English, Nayeli's gestures, and the few Apache words Luke knew, a fuller picture emerged. They were indeed brides, but not in the simple sense Luke had imagined. This was about alliance. 3 bands coming together through marriage to strengthen their position against encroaching settlers and Mexican forces. Each woman represented her band's commitment to the alliance. Their successful arrival would have sealed the peace. But some not want peace. Ayanna explained. Want war, take land, keep fighting. They attack us, make look like Mexicans did it, break alliance. The complexity of Apache politics surprised Luke, who, like most whites, had assumed the Apache were simply unified in their resistance. The truth was far more nuanced. Some bands sought accommodation and alliance, while others preferred continued warfare. Who leads the war faction? Luke asked. Nayeli spoke a name that made Ayanna flinch. Kuruk. Ayanna translated. He's strong warrior. Many follow. Says peace makes Apache weak. Luke understood the danger they all faced now. If Kuruk's faction learned the women survived and were with a white man, they would attack to finish what they started and eliminate Luke as a witness. As afternoon wore on, Luke found himself drawn into unexpected domesticity with his guests. He prepared a simple meal of beans and dried meat, which Nayeli improved with her knowledge of local herbs. Ayanna, despite her injury, insisted on helping tend to Ciala, showing a gentle touch that contrasted with her warrior's bearing. During quiet moments, Luke observed them more closely. Each woman carried herself with a distinct dignity. Ayanna possessed natural leadership, making decisions even while wounded. Nayeli combined fierce pride with surprising humor, occasionally making dry observations that needed no translation. And Ciala, even unconscious, had a serenity about her that suggested deep inner strength. As evening approached, Luke made another smoke signal at Nayeli's direction, different from the morning's pattern, this one indicating safety and location. The women grew tense as they waited for response, knowing that the wrong eyes might see the smoke. Your ranch, good land, Ayanna observed, looking out the window at the modest spread. Why you stay alone? Luke considered how to answer. Sometimes alone is easier than remembering, he finally said. She nodded slowly. But alone, not living, just waiting for death. Her words hit closer to truth than Luke cared to admit. For 3 years, he'd existed rather than lived, going through motions without purpose beyond survival. As darkness fell, they spotted fires in the distance, signal fires answering their call. Nayeli studied them intently, then relaxed. Good, she said. Chief comes tomorrow. Your chief? Luke asked. All chiefs, Ayanna corrected. For council. Decide what happens with Alliance. And with you. Luke felt the weight of that statement. Tomorrow. His fate would be decided by Apache leaders who had every reason to distrust white men. His life hung on the testimony of 3 wounded women and whatever honor the Apache saw in his actions. That night, Luke gave the women his bedroom while he kept watch in the main room, but sleep eluded him as questions multiplied. What would happen if the chiefs decided he knew too much? What if Kuruk's war faction arrived first? And underlying it all, a question he didn't want to examine. What would happen to these women if the alliance failed? Sometime near midnight, he heard movement. Ayanna had managed to walk to the main room, her face pale but determined. Cannot sleep, she asked. Too much thinking. Luke admitted. She lowered herself carefully into Martha's old rocking chair. You fear tomorrow. Wouldn't you? A slight smile touched her lips. Fear good. Keeps alive. But you save us when could leave us die. This. Apache remember. They sat in companionable silence. Two people from different worlds finding common ground in the quiet night. Luke realized that regardless of what tomorrow brought, something fundamental had changed. The isolation he'd wrapped around himself like armor had cracked, letting in possibility of connection he'd thought lost forever. "Tell me about your family," Ayanna said softly. So Luke did, speaking of Martha's laugh and Sarah's curiosity, of dreams built and destroyed, of love and loss. Ayanna listened without judgment, occasionally sharing her own losses. A brother killed in raid, a mother taken by sickness. As dawn approached, Luke felt the strange sensation of not being alone for the first time in years. Whatever the chiefs decided, whatever danger approached, he faced it as part of something larger than himself. The morning sun revealed dust clouds on the horizon, many riders approaching from multiple directions. The council was coming, and with it, judgment that would determine whether Luke's act of compassion would lead to salvation or destruction. The sound of hoofbeats grew steadily louder as the morning sun climbed higher over Luke's ranch. He stood on his porch, rifle in hand but held loosely, watching the dust clouds converge from three directions. Inside the cabin, the women prepared themselves as best they could, Ayanna binding her shoulder tighter, Nayeli moving despite her wound, and Ciala still unconscious but breathing more steadily than before. Scout nickered nervously in the corral. Sensing the approaching horses, Luke counted at least 40 riders, their forms becoming clearer as they drew near. At the head of the largest group rode a man whose presence commanded immediate attention. Tall even while mounted, with silver threading through his long black hair and a face carved by decades of leadership. The riders spread out in a semicircle around Luke's ranch, effectively surrounding it while leaving the appearance of open ground. It was a tactical position that spoke of long experience in warfare. Luke remained still, knowing that any sudden movement could be misinterpreted. The chief dismounted with fluid grace despite his years, and his warriors followed suit. He approached Luke with measured steps, his dark eyes taking in everything, the cabin, the corral, the white man standing alone on the porch. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of mountains. "I am Chief Naichi," he said in accented but clear English. "You have my daughter's sisters." Luke's throat went dry. Daughter's sisters, meaning one of the women inside was connected to this formidable leader by marriage or kinship. He chose his words carefully. 3 women came to me in the storm. Wounded, I gave them shelter and care. Naichi's expression remained unreadable. "Show me." Luke led the chief inside, acutely aware of the warriors who followed. The small cabin suddenly felt cramped with the presence of these men who moved with the controlled power of predators. When Naichi saw the women, something shifted in his stern features. He went immediately to Ciala's side, placing a weathered hand on her forehead. He spoke rapidly in Apache to one of his men, who hurried outside. "She is my brother's daughter," Naichi explained to Luke. "The others are her bond sisters, chosen to make the marriage alliance complete." He examined their wounds with experienced eyes, noting the care that had been taken with bandages and cleaning. Nayeli spoke to the chief in their language, her words flowing urgently. Luke caught his name several times and saw Naichi's eyes flick to him with what might have been surprise. Ayanna added her own account, gesturing to Luke and to their wounds. The warrior who had left returned with an elderly man carrying a medicine bundle. The medicine man went straight to Ciala, beginning a low chant while producing various items from his pouch. The other Apache watched with respect, even the fierce warriors showing deference to the healer. Naichi turned back to Luke. "My daughter's sisters tell me you risked much to save them, that you could have left them to die but chose not to. This is truth." "It is," Luke replied simply. "Why? Apache and white men are enemies. You could be killed for helping us." Luke thought of how to express what had driven him. "A man sees women hurt and dying. He helps, doesn't matter what color they are. That's how I was raised." Naichi studied him for a long moment. Then he surprised Luke by asking, "You lost family?" The question caught Luke off guard. He glanced at Ayanna, who must have shared what she'd learned. "My wife and daughter, 3 years ago." "Then you know the weight of loss. You understand why these women matter." Before Luke could respond, more riders appeared on the horizon. These moved differently, faster, more aggressively. Naichi's warriors immediately shifted position, hands moving to weapons. "Kuruk comes!" one of the warriors reported. Tension filled the cabin like smoke. Luke remembered what the women had told him about Kuruk, the war leader who opposed the peace alliance. Naichi's face hardened. "He will demand blood," the chief said quietly to Luke. "Yours and perhaps theirs. He believes the attack failed because of treachery." "But he ordered the attack," Luke protested. "Proving that is another matter." Naichi moved to the door. "Stay inside. Do not speak unless I call for you." Luke watched through the window as 20 more Apache warriors arrived. These painted for war and bristling with weapons. Their leader was younger than Naichi but radiated dangerous energy, where Naichi commanded through wisdom and respect. Kuruk led through fear and strength. The two leaders met in the yard, their words in Apache but their body language clear. Kuruk gestured angrily toward the cabin, while Naichi remained calm but firm. The discussion grew heated, other warriors from both groups edging closer. Inside, the medicine man continued his work on Ciala, seemingly oblivious to the danger outside. Nayeli had found Luke's rifle and held it ready, her wound forgotten in the face of threat. Ayana translated what she could hear. "Kuruk says you are enemy. Must die. Says women are contaminated by white man's touch. Cannot complete alliance now." Luke felt anger rise. "Contaminated? I saved their lives." "He knows," Ayana said grimly. "That is problem. You did what Apache warriors could not. Protect the brides. This makes him look weak." The argument outside escalated. Kuruk's hand moved to his knife, and Naichi's warriors tensed. It seemed violence would erupt at any moment when a weak voice spoke from the bed. "Grandfather." Ciala had awakened. Her voice was faint but clear. The medicine man helped her sit up, and she looked around with confusion that sharpened to understanding as she took in the scene. "Bring her," Naichi commanded through the door. Luke and the medicine man helped Ciala outside, where her appearance caused a stir among the warriors. She was weak, but held herself with dignity. "Every inch the chief's niece." She looked at Kuruk with steady eyes. "You ordered our deaths?" she said in English, clearly wanting Luke to understand. "You sent your men to kill us and blame others. This white man," she gestured to Luke, "showed more honor than you." Kuruk's face darkened. "You speak lies, woman. The fever has taken your mind." "I speak truth," Ciala insisted. "I heard your men talking before they attacked. They said you promised them wealth if the alliance failed." A murmur ran through the assembled warriors. Such an accusation could not be ignored. Kuruk's hand tightened on his knife. "The white man has poisoned your thoughts," he snarled. "I challenge him. Let combat prove the truth." Luke's blood ran cold. He was a fair hand with a gun, but knew that wouldn't be the weapon of choice here. Knife fighting against an Apache warrior meant certain death. "I accept," he said before he could think better of it. Naichi looked at him with something like respect. "You know what this means?" "I know." Luke's voice was steadier than he felt. "But these women deserve justice. The challenge is to first blood," Naichi declared, asserting his authority as senior chief. "Not to death. We have seen enough dying." Kuruk clearly wanted to protest but couldn't without losing face. A circle formed in the yard, warriors from both groups creating the boundary. Someone handed Luke a knife, shorter than Kuruk's but well balanced. As he stepped into the circle, Luke caught Ayana's eye. She nodded once, then spoke a single word in Apache. Later, he would learn it meant courage. Kuruk moved like a mountain cat, circling Luke with predatory grace. He feinted left, then struck right, the blade whistling past Luke's ribs. Only instinct saved him, throwing him backward as the knife carved air where he'd been. The warriors watched in silence as the two men danced their deadly ballet. Luke knew he couldn't match Kuruk's skill, so he relied on unpredictability. When Kuruk expected retreat, Luke pressed forward. When the warrior anticipated aggression, Luke gave ground. The fight felt eternal, though it lasted only minutes. Both men bled from minor cuts. Luke's arm, Kuruk's cheek. Neither wound enough to end the combat. Then Kuruk made a mistake, his anger overcoming his training. He lunged too far, expecting Luke to dodge backward. Instead, Luke stepped inside the arc, accepting a cut across his chest to bring his knife up under Kuruk's extended arm. The blade found the meaty part of the warrior's shoulder, drawing a spray of blood that clearly counted as first blood by any measure. Kuruk staggered back, disbelief on his face. He'd been bested by a white rancher, his reputation shattered in front of 2 bands. His warriors looked uncertain, their leader's defeat calling everything into question. "It is finished," Naichi declared. "The spirits have spoken through combat. The alliance stands, and this man," he indicated Luke, "stands under my protection." Kuruk's face twisted with rage and humiliation. He barked orders to his men, and they mounted their horses. But before leaving, he locked eyes with Luke. "This is not over. White man, you have made an enemy today." As Kuruk's band rode away, the tension slowly eased. The medicine man tended to Luke's wounds while Naichi organized his warriors. The immediate crisis had passed, but Luke understood that larger issues remained. "You fought well," Naichi told him. "But Kuruk speaks truth. You have made a dangerous enemy. He will not forget this shame." "I understand," Luke replied, wincing as the medicine man applied a stinging poultice to his chest. "Understanding and surviving are different things." Naichi looked toward the cabin where the women waited. "Now we must discuss what comes next. The alliance must be completed, but the brides have been through much, and there is the matter of your involvement." Luke sensed another challenge coming, one that might prove more complex than facing Kuruk's knife. But for now, he was alive, the women were safe, and justice had been served. In this harsh land, that counted as victory. The evening camp filled Luke's ranch with more life than it had seen in years. Apache warriors had set up temporary shelters around the property, their fires dotting the landscape like earthbound stars. Inside the cabin, a different gathering took place. Chief Naichi sat with the other band leaders who had arrived throughout the day, their faces grave as they discussed the situation. Luke found himself in the surreal position of hosting this council, providing what hospitality he could while Apache women prepared traditional foods outside. The 3 brides, Ayana, Nayeli, and Sayala, sat together near the fireplace, their presence both central to the discussion and somehow separate from it. Chief Naichi spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of tradition and authority. The alliance was to be sealed by marriage, 3 brides for 3 bands, joining our peoples in strength against those who would destroy us. But blood has been spilled, and the brides have been touched by violence and saved by an outsider. An older chief, his face weathered like ancient leather, nodded slowly. "Some will say the marriages cannot proceed, that the women are no longer suitable." "Those who say such things follow Kuruk's thinking." Another chief interjected, "Should we let his treachery succeed?" Luke understood enough to recognize the debate's complexity. These weren't simple arrangements, but political alliances with deep cultural significance. The attack had created complications that went beyond physical wounds. Naichi turned to Luke. "You have become part of this white man. Your actions saved the brides, but they have also complicated matters. Some among my people say you must be killed to clean this shame. Others say you should be honored. I must think of what is best for all, Apache." "I want no honor," Luke said carefully. "Only to see justice done." "Justice," the old chief mused. "Apache justice and white man justice are not always the same. Tell me, rancher, what do you know of our ways?" "Not much," Luke admitted. "Only that you're fighting to keep your land and way of life, same as any man would." And these women," the chief gestured to the brides. "What are they to you?" It was a loaded question, and Luke knew his answer mattered. "They're people who needed help. Nothing more, nothing less." Sayala spoke up, her voice stronger than it had been. "Grandfather, may I speak?" Naichi nodded, and she continued in Apache, occasionally switching to English for Luke's benefit. "This man risked his life for strangers. He showed honor when our own people showed treachery. The spirits brought us to him in our time of need. Perhaps this is not coincidence, but design." The chiefs exchanged glances. One of them, younger than the others with keen eyes, leaned forward. "What are you suggesting, daughter?" "The alliance must stand," Ciala said firmly. "Our peoples need this unity, but perhaps the form can change while keeping the spirit." Nayeli added her voice. "We three have talked. We were chosen as brides because we are strong, because we can help lead our people. This has not changed, but we have been marked by this experience, changed by it. Should we not have say in our own fates?" The older chiefs looked uncomfortable with this departure from tradition, but Naichi seemed thoughtful. "You speak of new ways, but new ways can be dangerous." "As dangerous as Kuruk's war?" Ayana asked pointedly. "As dangerous as extinction. We must adapt or perish." The debate continued in rapid Apache, voices rising and falling with passion. Luke caught fragments but relied on the women's expressions to gauge the discussion's direction. Finally, Naichi raised his hand for silence. "We will camp here tonight and tomorrow. The medicine man will tend the wounded. We will think on these matters." He looked at Luke. "You will not be harmed. You have my word. But you also cannot leave. You are part of this now, whether you wished it or not." As the formal council dispersed, Luke found himself alone with the three women for the first time since the chiefs arrived. They sat in comfortable silence, each lost in thought. "What happens now?" Luke finally asked. Ayana looked at him with those deep, knowing eyes. "Now we wait. Chiefs must think, must talk with spirit guides. But also—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "They must decide about you. About me. You saved us," Nayeli explained. "In our way, this creates obligation, bond. You are responsible for lives you save." Luke felt a chill despite the fire's warmth. "What kind of responsibility?" "That is what chiefs must decide," Ciala said softly. "Some will say you must provide for us always. Others will say the debt is paid. But all will agree. You cannot simply return to your old life." The weight of this settled on Luke's shoulders like a heavy blanket. He'd acted from simple human decency, but in doing so, had entered a world of complex obligations and ancient customs he barely understood. As night deepened, warriors took turns on watch while others slept. Luke gave his bed to the women again and tried to rest on the floor, but sleep eluded him. Through the window, he could see the Apache fires and hear soft singing, prayers or stories. He couldn't tell which. Near midnight, Ayana joined him in the main room, moving carefully with her wounded shoulder. "Cannot sleep either?" "Too much to think about," Luke admitted. She settled into the rocking chair again, a habit that seemed to comfort her. "You regret helping us?" "No," Luke answered without hesitation. "Never that, just wondering what comes next." "That is wise. Many whites think only of today. Apache must think of 7 generations ahead." She rocked slowly, the chair creaking rhythmically. "Tell me of your wife." Luke found himself sharing memories he'd kept locked away. How he'd met Martha at a church social, their courtship, their dreams of building something lasting in this hard land. Ayana listened without interrupting, her presence somehow making the telling easier. "She would have liked you," Luke said finally. "All 3 of you. She believed in strength, in doing what's right regardless of the cost. Then she chose her husband well." Ayana observed, "Not all men would risk everything for strangers. I'm no hero, just didn't want more death on this land. Sometimes that is the greatest heroism, choosing life over death, peace over war." They sat quietly, watching the fire burn low. Luke found himself studying Ayana's profile in the flickering light, strong features softened by compassion, eyes that held both sorrow and hope. "What do you want?" he asked suddenly. "If the choice were yours alone?" She considered this carefully. "I want my people to survive. I want the alliance to succeed. I want—" She paused, then continued more softly. "I want to choose my own path, not have it chosen for me. But such wants may be luxury we cannot afford. Everyone should have choice in their own life. Luke said firmly. That is white man thinking. Apache think of community first, individual second. But perhaps, she looked at him directly, perhaps there is wisdom in both ways. Morning brought new activity as more Apache arrived, families of the chiefs, curious about the unprecedented situation. Children peered at Luke with wide eyes while their mothers pretended not to notice the white man who had saved their brides. The medicine man declared Ciala and Nayeli well enough to move about freely, though both remained weak. The three women spent the morning in conference with various elder women, leaving Luke to tend his neglected ranch chores under the watchful eyes of Apache guards. It was late afternoon when Chief Naichi summoned Luke to another council. This time, the three brides were present, dressed in their finest clothing despite their injuries. The gathered chiefs seemed to have reached some consensus, though not all looked pleased. "We have decided," Naichi announced. "The alliance will proceed, but in new form. The brides will choose their own paths, whether to complete arranged marriages or seek different ways to bind our peoples. This is unprecedented, but these are unprecedented times." He turned to Luke. "As for you, white man, you present a problem. You have saved Apache lives, created debt that must be honored, but you are not Apache, cannot simply be absorbed into our bands. Yet neither can you be released to potentially reveal our locations and plans to enemies." Luke's mouth went dry as he waited for the verdict. "Therefore," Naichi continued, "we offer you choice. Leave this territory forever. Go far where you can tell no tales of what you've seen. Or," he paused significantly, "remain under our protection, as friend to Apache, with all that entails." "What does that entail exactly?" Luke asked. The chief's expression was unreadable. "You would be neither white nor Apache, but something between. You could trade with us, help when needed, speak for us to whites who might listen, but you would also be target for those like Kuruk who hate any cooperation between our peoples." Luke looked at the three women, saw something in their faces. Hope, fear, possibility. He thought of his empty ranch, his purposeless existence these past 3 years. "I need time to think," he said. "You have until tomorrow's dawn," Naichi replied. "But know this. Whatever you choose affects not just you, but these women who owe you their lives. In saving them, you have bound your fate to theirs in ways that neither Apache law nor white man's law fully recognizes." As the council dispersed, Luke understood that his simple act of compassion had led to a moment of choice that would define not just his future, but possibly the future of Apache-white relations in this part of the territory. The weight of it was staggering. Yet, somehow, for the first time in 3 years, he felt truly alive. The night stretched endlessly as Luke walked the perimeter of his ranch, his mind churning with the weight of the decision before him. The Apache fires had burned low, but he could see the silhouettes of warriors keeping watch, their presence both protective and constraining. Above, the desert stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to the human dramas below. He found himself at the small cemetery plot where Martha and Sarah lay buried. The wooden crosses had weathered but still stood straight, marking the end of one life and, perhaps, the beginning of another. Luke knelt between the graves, his hands working automatically to clear away the desert grass that had grown around them. "What would you have me do, Martha?" he whispered to the night. "You always saw things clearer than me." The wind whispered through the mesquite trees, and for a moment, Luke could almost hear his wife's voice, gentle but firm, the way she'd been when pushing him to see beyond his own limitations. She would have welcomed the Apache women without hesitation, would have seen the humanity in them that too many whites refused to acknowledge. A sound behind him made Luke turn. Ayanna stood a respectful distance away, her tall figure wrapped in a blanket against the night chill. "I apologize for intruding," she said softly. "I saw you leave and was concerned." "No intrusion," Luke assured her. "Just talking to ghosts." She moved closer, her movements careful due to her healing shoulder. Apache believe the spirits of loved ones never truly leave. They walk beside us, guide us when we listen. Do they ever answer? Luke asked, only half joking. In their way, through wind, through dreams, through the actions of others. She looked at the graves with respectful curiosity. Your wife and daughter? Martha and Sarah. Fever took them 3 years ago come winter. Ayanna was quiet for a moment, then spoke with careful deliberation. Among my people, when someone saves a life, they become responsible for that life. But it goes both ways. The saved also becomes bound to the Savior. We three, Naili, Ciala, and I, we have talked much about this. Luke stood, brushing dirt from his knees. And what have you decided? That old ways and new ways must sometimes meet. The alliance our chiefs seek is important, but perhaps it can take forms they have not imagined. She paused, seeming to gather courage. You asked what I wanted if the choice were mine alone. I have an answer now. The night seemed to hold its breath as Luke waited. I want to build bridges. Ayanna continued. Between Apache and white, between old and new. I have seen too much death, too much hatred. If there is another way, I want to find it. That's a dangerous path, Luke observed. Both sides might turn against you. Then I would need someone who understands both worlds, even if they belong fully to neither. Her dark eyes met his meaningfully. Before Luke could respond, they heard urgent voices from the camp. Both hurried back to find scouts reporting to Chief Naichi. The chief's expression was grim as he listened. Then grimmer still as he issued rapid orders. What is it? Luke asked. Army patrol, Naichi replied tersely. 2 days' ride, heading this direction. 50 soldiers, maybe more. Luke's blood ran cold. If the army found Apache camped at his ranch, they'd assume he was trading weapons or harboring hostiles. The consequences would be swift and brutal. You have to leave, Luke said urgently. Take the women and go. And you? Naichi asked. I'll handle the army. Tell them you were never here. The chief studied him. They will not believe you. There are too many signs of our presence. Then I'll tell them you forced me, held me hostage. And when they ask why you still live, why no blood was shed? Naichi shook his head. No, white man, if we run now, we confirm their suspicions. Better to face them with truth, or at least part of it. The truth will get us all killed, Luke protested. Perhaps it is time for new truths. Naichi turned to his sub-chiefs. Break the main camp. Warriors fade into the hills, but stay close. Leave only a small group, elder women, children, wounded. Make it look like refugees seeking aid, not war party. The transformation was remarkable. Within an hour, the large encampment had vanished like smoke, leaving only a handful of Apache who appeared decidedly non-threatening. The 3 brides remained, of course, along with some elder women and a few children. This is madness, Luke muttered. This is opportunity, Naichi corrected. You wanted to know what being friend to Apache means. Now you learn. The next day passed intense preparation. Luke coached the remaining Apache on what to say, while they instructed him on how to present their situation. The bride spent time making the ranch look more domestic, hanging blankets, preparing food, creating the appearance of peaceful coexistence. It was Ciala who suggested the key deception. Tell them we are Christian converts, she said. Whites always prefer Apache who accept their God, but that's a lie. Luke protested. Is it? Naili challenged. Your God teaches compassion, helps the wounded, loves enemy. You showed us this. Perhaps we learn your God through your actions, not your words. On the morning of the second day, dust clouds announced the army's approach. Luke stood on his porch, deliberately visible and unarmed. As 50 cavalry soldiers rode up in perfect formation, their commander, a captain with sun-weathered features and suspicious eyes, dismounted carefully. Mr. Matthews, the captain said, clearly already knowing who Luke was. Captain Samuel Morrison, Fort Bayard. We've had reports of Apache activity in this area. There are Apache here, Captain, Luke said calmly. Refugees, women and children seeking shelter after an attack. Morrison's eyes narrowed. You're harboring Apache? I'm offering Christian charity to those in need, Luke replied, grateful for Ciala's suggestion. These are peaceful Apache, some considering conversion. They came seeking help, and I couldn't turn them away. Christian Apache? Morrison's skepticism was evident. And I suppose next you'll tell me they're farming and wearing proper clothes. See for yourself, Luke invited, gesturing to the ranch. The captain motioned to his sergeant, and a squad of soldiers dismounted, rifles ready. Luke led them around the property, showing the peaceful domestic scene the Apache had created. Elder women looked up from grinding corn. Children peered shyly from behind their grandmother's skirts, and the three brides sat together, working on traditional crafts. Ayanna rose when the soldiers approached, her bearing dignified despite her healing wound. "Good morning," she said in clear English. "We are grateful for Mr. Matthew's kindness in our time of need." Morrison blinked, clearly not expecting educated English from an Apache woman. "You speak our language." "I learn," Ayanna replied, deliberately simplifying her speech. "Mr. Matthews teaches us about your God, your ways. We want peace, not war." "And how many warriors are hidden in those hills?" Morrison demanded. "No warriors here," Nayeli interjected. "Warriors dead or scattered. We are all that remain of our band." It wasn't entirely a lie. Their specific band had been just the three of them for the marriage journey. Morrison studied them suspiciously but couldn't find fault with the peaceful scene. "Mr. Matthews," the captain said, drawing Luke aside, "are you aware of the regulations regarding harboring potential hostiles?" "I'm aware of God's law regarding helping those in need." Luke countered, "These women were dying. Would you have had me let them perish?" "That would have been safer for everyone," Morrison said bluntly. "Apache or Apache, Christian or otherwise, they'll turn on you the moment it suits them. Like white men turned on them at Sand Creek," Luke asked quietly. "Or at Camp Grant?" Morrison's face darkened. Those massacres of peaceful Apache were still fresh wounds, embarrassments to the Army's honor. "Watch yourself, Matthews. Your sympathies are showing. My humanity is showing," Luke corrected. "These people need help. When they're healed, they'll move on. Until then, they're under my protection." "Your protection?" Morrison laughed harshly. "You're one man with a rifle. What happens when their warriors come for them?" "Then I'll deal with that when it happens. But I won't turn out wounded women and children to die in the desert." Morrison studied him for a long moment. "You're either a fool or a saint, Matthews. Maybe both." He turned to his sergeant. "Mount up. We're leaving." "Sir?" The sergeant seemed surprised. "No law against being a damn fool," Morrison said. "And technically, no law against helping wounded civilians, even Apache ones." He fixed Luke with a hard stare. "But I'll be back. Matthews, regular patrols. If I find one warrior, one weapon beyond that hunting rifle of yours, I'll burn this place to the ground and see you hanged for treason. Understood?" "Understood, Captain." As the cavalry rode away, Luke felt his knees go weak with relief. The Apache women and children emerged from their posed activities, and within minutes, warriors began materializing from the hills like ghosts. Chief Naichi approached Luke with something like approval in his eyes. "You lied to protect us." "I told selective truths," Luke corrected. "Seemed like the Apache way." Naichi actually smiled at that. "Perhaps you understand us better than you know." He grew serious again. "But the soldier chief spoke true. He will return, and next time may not be so easy. You have bought us time, but also marked yourself. The Army will watch you now." "I know," Luke said quietly. "And still you choose to stand with us?" Luke looked around at the Apache faces, warrior and woman, elder and child. He thought of the three brides who had entered his life so dramatically, of the choices that had led to this moment. "Someone has to build those bridges Ayanna spoke of," he said finally. "Might as well be a fool rancher who's got nothing left to lose." Naichi nodded slowly. "Then you have chosen. But know this, the path ahead is dangerous. Karuk still plots against us. The Army suspects you, and the alliance remains uncertain. You may have saved 3 lives only to lose your own." "Maybe," Luke agreed. But for the first time in 3 years, I feel like I'm living for something instead of just waiting to die. That's worth any risk. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of fire, Luke stood among the Apache and felt the strange sensation of belonging, not fully to their world or his own, but to something new being born between them, fragile as desert flowers after rain, but just as determined to bloom. The dawn came slowly to the desert, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Luke stood before the assembled Apache chiefs, the weight of decision heavy on his shoulders. The 3 brides, Ayanna, Nayeli, and Sayala, waited nearby, their faces composed but their eyes revealing the tension they felt. The entire camp seemed to hold its breath. Chief Naichi rose from his place in the circle of leaders, his weathered face grave. "The night has passed. White man, what is your choice?" Luke had spent the dark hours wrestling with the decision, walking the land, consulting his heart and the memory of his departed family. Now, with the sun breaking the horizon, he knew his answer with the clarity that comes from accepting one's destiny. "I choose to stay," Luke said, his voice carrying across the gathered Apache. "To be a bridge between worlds, as Ayanna spoke of, to help where I can, to learn what I must, and to face whatever comes." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some warriors nodded approval. Others looked skeptical. Karuk's supporters, though fewer after his shameful defeat, still watched with hostile eyes. Naichi stepped forward. "You understand what this means? You will be neither fully white nor Apache. Many will call you traitor. Your own people may seek your death as readily as our enemies might." "My own people are buried on this land," Luke replied. "What I'm choosing is to live again, to have purpose beyond mere survival. If that means standing between 2 worlds, then that's where I'll stand." The chief studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "So be it. But first, we must address the matter of the brides and the alliance. The attack has changed everything, yet the need for unity remains." He turned to the 3 women. "You have been given choice in your own fates, something rarely granted. The alliance can take many forms. What do you say?" Sayala stepped forward first, still weak but with iron determination. "I will honor my commitment to the alliance, but in a new way. I propose to return to my intended's band, not just as bride, but as teacher. I will share what I've learned here, that whites and Apache can coexist, that understanding is possible." The chiefs murmured among themselves. This was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Sayala's near-death experience gave her words weight, and her proposal offered a different kind of bond between bands. Nayeli spoke next. "I too will serve the alliance, but I ask to establish a trading post at the border of our territories, a place where Apache and whites can meet safely, exchange goods, and perhaps begin to exchange understanding. I have seen that not all whites are our enemies, just as not all Apache seek war." This caused more discussion. A trading post would be vulnerable, requiring protection and trust from both sides, but it could also provide valuable supplies and a neutral ground for negotiations. Finally, Ayanna stepped forward. Luke found himself holding his breath, though he couldn't say why her choice mattered so deeply to him. "I choose a different path," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I have seen courage and compassion in unexpected places. The man who saved us has lost everything to loneliness and grief, yet still chose to help strangers. He now chooses to risk all for understanding between our peoples." She looked directly at Luke as she continued. "By our tradition, saved and savior are bound. I propose to honor that bond. I will stay here, help build the bridge between worlds we have spoken of. If Luke Matthews will have me, I offer to stand beside him in this work, not as Apache or white, but as 2 people choosing to create something new." The silence that followed was profound. Luke felt the blood drain from his face as the implications hit him. Ayanna was proposing something far beyond mere cooperation. She was offering to bind her life to his, to share the dangers and possibilities of the path they'd chosen. "This is unprecedented," one of the elder chiefs protested. "An Apache woman choosing a white man, the mixing of bloodlines? Unprecedented times call for unprecedented choices," Nietzsche replied thoughtfully. We face extinction if we cannot adapt. Perhaps the young ones see paths we elders cannot. He turned to Luke. What say you to this proposal? Will you accept this bond, knowing it will mark you forever as apart from your own kind? Luke looked at Ayanna, seeing in her eyes not romantic fantasy, but clear-headed determination. She was choosing this as a warrior chooses a battle, with full knowledge of the costs and commitment to see it through. I accept, Luke said, his voice rough with emotion. I've been apart from my own kind since I buried my family. If Ayanna is willing to share the risks of this path, I'm honored to walk it with her. Then it will be so, Nietzsche declared. But understand, this is not merely personal choice. You two will be symbols, for good or ill, of what cooperation between our peoples might bring. Every success will be celebrated, every failure scrutinized. Can you bear such weight? We have both borne loss and survived. Ayanna replied, We can bear this too. The rest of the day was spent in planning and preparation. The alliance would proceed in its new form, Siala as cultural ambassador, Nayeli as trader and bridge builder, and Ayanna as living proof that Apache and White could work together. It was more complex than simple marriage alliances, but perhaps stronger for that complexity. As the other bands prepared to depart, Luke found himself in deep conversation with Nietzsche about practical matters. The chief was no fool. He knew the challenges ahead would be immense. Morrison will return as promised, Nietzsche warned. And when he learns of this arrangement, he will not be pleased. I'll handle Morrison, Luke said with more confidence than he felt. The law is murky about such things. There's no statute against marriage between races in the territory, and as long as we're peaceful, he has no grounds to act. Law and what men do are often different things, Nietzsche observed. You will need protection. I will assign warriors to watch your land, but discreetly. Too visible a presence will provoke the army. And Kuruk? Kuruk is my concern. He has been shamed and will seek to restore his honor, but he is also practical. If this new way shows promise, if it brings strength to the Apache, even he may eventually accept it. If not, Nietzsche's hand touched his knife meaningfully. As evening approached, the Apache bands began their departures. Siala, strengthened by the medicine man's treatments, embraced her bond sisters before mounting a horse to ride with her intended's people. Her parting words to Luke were simple but profound. You gave me life. I will use it to give life to peace. Nayeli's departure was more elaborate, as she negotiated with various chiefs about the location and protection of her proposed trading post. She extracted promises of safe passage and initial trade goods, showing a shrewd business sense that surprised no one who had seen her fierce intelligence. I will send word when the post is established, she told Luke. You will always be welcome there, bridge builder. As the bands disappeared into the desert twilight, Luke's ranch felt suddenly empty despite Ayanna's presence. They stood together on the porch, watching the last riders vanish into the gathering darkness. Regrets? Ayanna asked softly. About my choice? No, Luke replied. About what's coming? Maybe. I've brought danger to both of us. Danger was already here, she corrected. You've brought possibility. That is worth any risk. They were quiet for a moment. Then Luke asked, What do we do now? I mean, practically speaking. You're used to a different life, different ways. This ranch isn't much, and I don't know how to... That is, I don't want to assume. Ayanna's laugh was soft but genuine. You saved my life. Accept exile from your people for my sake. And now you worry about proprieties? Luke Matthews, you are an unusual man. I just want to do right by you, he said honestly. This isn't what either of us expected or planned. No, she agreed. But perhaps that makes it more true. We choose each other not from passion or arrangement, but from understanding. We both know loss, know courage, know the price of standing for what we believe. That is a foundation stronger than many marriages built on easier ground. As full darkness fell, they prepared simple sleeping arrangements, maintaining respectful distance while adjusting to their new reality. There would be time for deeper connection, for learning each other's ways and building the partnership they'd chosen. For now, it was enough to have made the choice, to have stepped onto the bridge between worlds. But even as Luke settled in for the night, he could feel the weight of watching eyes. Somewhere in the darkness, Apache warriors kept guard as promised, somewhere else. Karuk nursed his wounded pride and plotted revenge. And in 2 days, Captain Morrison would return, suspicious and searching for any excuse to destroy what they were trying to build. The path ahead was fraught with danger from all sides, but for the first time since Martha's death, Luke felt truly alive. Beside him, Ayanna began softly singing an Apache prayer song, her voice carrying both sorrow for what was lost and hope for what might be born. Together, they faced the uncertain dawn, 2 people choosing to forge something new from the ashes of their separate griefs. The desert wind carried their hopes into the vast night, where stars wheeled indifferent to human struggles, but somehow blessing them all the same. Chief Naichi stood at the center of the gathered Apache, the morning sun casting long shadows across the desert floor. The decision had been made, unprecedented as it was, and now came the moment of formal acknowledgement. Luke and Ayanna stood before him, aware that this ceremony would bind not just 2 people, but potentially 2 worlds. "What we do here has no tradition to guide it," Naichi began, his voice carrying the weight of leadership. "We forge new paths through dangerous territory. Some will say we betray our ancestors. Others will say we ensure our children's survival. Time alone will judge." He gestured to an elderly woman who stepped forward carrying a beautifully woven blanket. "This was made by my grandmother, carried through many battles, many treaties broken and kept. It represents the endurance of the Apache people. Ayanna, daughter of warriors, do you accept the weight of this symbol?" "I accept it, uncle," Ayanna replied formally, using the term of respect. "I will honor our people's strength while seeking new ways to preserve it." Naichi then turned to Luke. "You have no token of your people to offer, having chosen to stand apart from them. What do you bring to this union?" Luke had thought about this through the night. Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small leather-bound book, Martha's Bible, worn from use and precious beyond measure. "This belonged to my late wife," he said quietly. "It teaches about love, sacrifice, and bridges between earth and heaven. I offer it as a symbol that some bridges are worth building, no matter the cost." Ayanna accepted the Bible with grave respect, understanding the magnitude of the gesture, in the Apache way. She then removed a small beaded pouch from around her neck. "This holds earth from the 4 sacred mountains of our people," she explained to Luke. "Wherever I go, I carry home with me. Now this ranch, this land, becomes part of that home." The ceremony was unlike any wedding either culture would recognize, yet it held profound meaning for all present. There were no priests or medicine men presiding, no traditional vows or ancient rituals. Instead, 2 people simply chose each other and their shared path before witnesses who understood the courage that choice required. As the formalities concluded and the remaining Apache prepared for departure, Ciala approached. Her recovery had been remarkable, strength returning daily under the medicine man's care. "I have decided," she announced. "The Alliance needs voices of experience, those who have seen both conflict and cooperation. I will establish a school in the borderlands, teaching Apache children the skills they need to navigate the changing world while keeping our traditions alive." It was ambitious, even dangerous. Schools for native children were typically instruments of cultural destruction, forcing them to abandon their heritage. But Ciala envisioned something different, education that empowered rather than erased. "You'll need supplies, protection," Luke pointed out. "Already arranged?" Naili interjected, joining them with her characteristic efficiency. "My trading post will supply the school. Together, we create a network of connection points between worlds." The 3 women embraced, their bond forged in crisis now evolving into purposeful action. Each would take tremendous risks, face opposition from multiple sides, but together they represented hope for a different future. As the sun reached its zenith, The Apache bands departed in different directions. Warriors melted into the landscape with practiced ease. Families loaded travois with careful efficiency. And the chiefs led their people toward uncertain futures with ancient dignity. Soon, only Luke and Ayanna remained at the ranch, the sudden quiet almost overwhelming after days of activity. They stood together on the porch, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "The real work begins now," Ayanna said softly, "building that bridge." Luke agreed, "Though I'm not sure either of us knows how." "We learn by walking," she replied, using an Apache proverb. "Each step shows the next." They spent the afternoon in practical tasks, reorganizing the cabin to accommodate 2 lives, tending the neglected ranch chores, beginning the delicate process of merging different ways of life. Ayanna proved knowledgeable about desert plants Luke had ignored, showing him food and medicine growing wild on his own land. Luke shared his ranching knowledge, the patterns of weather and water that meant survival in this harsh country. As evening approached, riders appeared on the horizon. Luke tensed, reaching for his rifle, but Ayanna placed a calming hand on his arm. "Expected visitors," she said. "Naichi promised protection, but first they must know the land." 3 Apache warriors approached, their leader a man near Luke's age with intelligent eyes and careful movements. He introduced himself as Dakeya, assigned to coordinate the discreet protection Naichi had promised. "We will not be seen unless needed," Dakeya explained in serviceable English. "Camps in the hills, watchers on the ridges. If trouble comes, smoke signals will bring help." "And if the army notices Apache movement?" Luke asked. "Then we are hunting, trading, doing what Apache have always done." Dakeya replied with a slight smile. "Your Captain Morrison sees what he expects to see. We ensure he expects very little." After the warriors departed to establish their watch posts, Luke and Ayanna shared their first meal as partners. The simple fare, beans, dried meat, and flatbread, seemed somehow transformed by the momentousness of the day. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in thoughts of the future. "Tell me about your family," Luke eventually asked. "Your parents, your childhood. I know so little of your life before." Ayanna's eyes grew distant as she spoke of growing up in the Chiricahua bands, of a father killed in a cavalry charge when she was young, of a mother who taught her both women's crafts and warriors' skills. She spoke of the constant movement, the struggle to maintain traditional ways as the world shifted around them, the gradual realization that adaptation might be the only path to survival. "Some called my mother weak for teaching me English, for encouraging trade with settlements," Ayanna said, "but she saw farther than most. Learn your enemy until they are no longer enemy," she would say. "Knowledge is the strongest weapon." "She sounds wise," Luke observed. Soldiers killed her 2 winters ago, shot her while she gathered pine nuts, claimed she was a hostile." The pain in Ayanna's voice was controlled but present. "That day, I understood her wisdom even more. Hatred would honor her death, but understanding might prevent others." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and silences, beginning the slow work of building trust and connection. When Luke finally showed Ayanna to what would be their shared space, he was careful to maintain respectful distance, understanding that partnership didn't automatically mean intimacy. "Time," Ayanna said simply. Recognizing his consideration, "We have chosen the path. How we walk it will unfold as it should." Over the following days, they established new routines. Ayanna proved an able partner in ranch work, her strength and desert knowledge complementing Luke's experience. They expanded the garden with native plants she knew, improved water collection systems with Apache techniques, and began planning for the increased traffic their bridge-building efforts might bring. The first test came sooner than expected. A week after the Apache departure, 2 white traders appeared at the ranch. Their initial friendliness curdled when they saw Ayanna. "Didn't know you'd gone native, Matthews," one sneered. "Bad for business, keeping Apache around." "My wife is bad for business?" Luke asked mildly, though his hand stayed near his pistol The word wife hit them like cold water. They exchanged glances, calculating whether to cause trouble, but something in Luke's stance and Ayana's steady gaze discouraged them. They concluded their minimal business and left, but Luke knew word would spread quickly. "It begins," Ayana said simply. More visitors followed, some Apache testing the new arrangement, some whites curious or hostile about Luke's choices. Each encounter required careful navigation, determining friend from foe, opportunity from threat. The promised army patrol returned exactly 2 weeks after Morrison's first visit. Luke and Ayana were ready, the ranch showing careful normalcy. Morrison's expression when he saw Ayana wearing a mixture of Apache and settler clothing was worth the preparation. "Mrs. Matthews," the captain said stiffly, the title clearly difficult for him. "Captain," Ayana replied with perfect courtesy, "would you care for water? The day is warm." Morrison declined but subjected them to intense questioning. Where were the other Apache? Why was Ayana still here? What were their intentions? Luke answered truthfully within limits. The others had returned to their bands. Ayana had chosen to stay and help with the ranch. They intended to live peacefully and perhaps facilitate trade. "Trade," Morrison repeated skeptically. "And I suppose next you'll be teaching Apache to farm and wear proper clothes." "Only if they choose to learn," Luke replied. "Just as I'm learning their ways of surviving on this land. Seems to me both sides might benefit from such exchange." Morrison left dissatisfied but without grounds for action. His parting warning was clear. "I'll be watching. Matthews, one wrong move, one sign of hostile activity, and I'll have you in irons." As his patrol disappeared into the distance, Ayana observed, "He fears what he doesn't understand. Most people do." Luke agreed. "That's what we're trying to change." That evening, as the desert sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, Luke found himself standing with Ayana at the graves of his first family. She had suggested the visit, understanding that honoring the past was necessary for building the future. "They would be proud," she said softly. "You have chosen life over death, hope over fear." "I hope so," Luke replied, feeling the strange mixture of sorrow and possibility that had become his constant companion. As they walked back to the cabin, hand in hand for the first time, Luke realized that their story was just beginning. The challenges ahead were enormous. Karuk's inevitable revenge, Morrison's suspicious scrutiny, the resistance from both cultures to their unprecedented union, but there was also hope in the letters already arriving from Ciala about her school, in Nayeli's reports of successful trading negotiations, in the simple fact that Apache warriors protected a white man's ranch, while that white man learned to see the world through Apache eyes. The desert stars emerged one by one as night fell, eternal witnesses to the human dramas below, and somewhere between two worlds, on a small ranch that had become a symbol of possibility, two people continued the patient work of building bridges that others said could never stand. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this story from, whether you're listening during a long drive across the prairie, relaxing by a campfire, or just taking a break from your busy day. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, courage, and adventure from the American frontier. And share your thoughts about Luke and Ayana's journey in the comments below.